Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Taylor Clem. I am the Environmental and Community Horticulture Agent here with UF IFAS Extension, Alachua County, as well as the Master Gardener Volunteer Coordinator. Thank you for joining us. Today's program is the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, Wildlife in Your Landscape. So all of us have experience dealing with wildlife in our landscape, sometimes good, sometimes bad. But with the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, our goal is to how do we attract wildlife to the landscape? How do we attract beneficial wildlife to our landscape and manage those landscape pests that do pop up appropriately? So I would like to thank, we have Mark Frank as well as Susan Nugent. They are our Master Gardener volunteers here at Alachua County. And if you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to put those questions in our chat box within the Q&A along the way. But before we get going, what I would like you all to do is feel free in the chat box, tell me what are some of the animals or wildlife that you like to see in your garden or in your landscape. Butterflies and hummingbirds, wonderful. Dragonflies, more deer, great. Rabbits, birds, songbirds. Oh man, I'm loving, this is really popping up. Snakes, gators, deer, possums. This is amazing diversity. Fox, someone mentioned a fox. We actually have a fox that lives by my house, and we see the fox walk up and down through the little greenway. So it's really, really nice to see, you know, because I live in Gainesville. So where do you see a fox in Gainesville that often, an urbanizing community? Otter, yeah. Possums, raccoons, out of the garden, yeah. Oh, one person said Tyrannosaurus Rex. Hope not. They may eat your entire garden, but this is great. So I think, you know, everyone's saying that there's a lot of things that they like to see within the landscape of the garden, and there's a huge diversity of what we're wanting to see. So the purpose of today's program is not necessarily tell you exactly how to attract specific wildlife, because we could spend an entire program on one specific mammal, one specific bird, one specific anything in wildlife, and we can have a whole program on that. So we're going to cover a big overarching how do we attract this wildlife? That's what we're going to cover, is like those big primary things that we need to consider ourselves, or to consider when designing or planning a landscape to attract wildlife. I have one question that came through. It says, where are you finding all these questions? The chat is private. Only the panelists have the ability to see what's written inside the chat. So the panelists, when they respond, you can see their responses. All right, so I'll go ahead and I'll move forward with the PowerPoint. So by the end of today's program, we'll be able to answer these two big questions, or I want you to be able to answer these two big questions: is what is the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, as well as what are the essential elements to attracting wildlife in my landscape? So the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, that's one of the big ones that we want to talk about. Why is it important, and why is it important to our conversation today? So many of you have probably seen me show this graph before. You've seen it in other programs, but this is Florida development in 2005. What you see in the red is what we consider developed land. The green, that darker green, is kind of like conservation areas, parks, etc. And the thing is, when the study was done, this was looking at development practices and how the population is expected to change over the next 50 years. So this came from the Florida 2060 plan, and based off 2005, our population is expected to double by 2060. So that is going to make us develop more, and that's going to have a big impact on the landscape. So this is actually what, from that model, this is what Florida development is expected to look like by 2060 based off our current development patterns. This has a huge impact on wildlife, has a huge impact on diversity of wildlife, as well as all of our other important resources like water resources and water quality. So our population is expected to double by 2060 from that early 2000 study. And that's going to just have an increased demand for water, an increased amount of pollution, as well as a decreased habitats that filter polluted runoff before it enters the aquifer, as well as those decreased habitats for wildlife. So wildlife numbers and population would decline with that increase of development. So whenever we talk about the Florida-friendly landscaping program, we always think about water use. Water use is very, very, very important. So approximately 60% of homeowner water use is used for lawn and landscape irrigation. That's a lot of water. So if we start thinking about habitats, you know, we're pulling water from important habitats in order to water our landscapes. And the Florida-friendly landscaping program, or the Florida-friendly landscape program, helps us learn how to manage those resources better within our landscape. Whoop, ignore that slide. But the Florida-friendly landscaping program, it is an integrated approach to maintain an attractive, colorful, and diverse yard. It's friendly to wildlife, it's environmentally responsible, and less work than a traditional landscape. Kinda. Put in kinda because it depends on how you end up managing that environmentally friendly, that Florida-friendly landscape. But ultimately it comes back to conserving water and protecting water quality, but also one of the important goals of it is attracting wildlife. So this program, this Florida-friendly landscaping crash course, this is actually the second class in a quarterly series this year. The first class, we talked about fertilizers and pesticides of Florida-friendly landscaping, and this program is specifically talking about that attracting wildlife with the Florida-friendly landscaping program. So the FFL program, we break it down into 9 different principles. So those 9 principles, right plant, right place is the first one. That's the big overarching principle for the entire FFL program. If we follow right plant, right place, we have the ability to start to follow the other principles much easier. So right plant, right place. The second one is water efficiently. Third, fertilize appropriately. Fourth is mulch. Fifth, attract wildlife. 6 is manage yard pest. 7 is recycle. 8 is reduce stormwater runoff. And 9 is protect the waterfront. So today's program specifically, we're going to focus on, we're going to talk about right plant, right place because it's important to talk about that one. But we're going to focus specifically on attract wildlife and those different conditions or characteristics that we need to think about to attract wildlife into our landscapes, which can also mean how do we keep certain other wildlife out of the landscape depending on what they are. So let's go ahead and first talk about the first principle, which is right plant, right place. Who knows what this nasty little thing is that's on the PowerPoint screen? Go ahead and put that in the chat box to see if you know what that is. Y'all are good. Invasive. Yes. So everybody, I mean, everybody sending in responses. Yes, that is coral ardisia. That is one of our public enemy #1s. It is a highly invasive, brought in as an ornamental because it does look absolutely beautiful. It is a beautiful shrub, but my goodness, it is detrimental. It displaces our wildlife. It displaces a lot of our natural ground covers or our natural plant communities, and it just overtakes big chunk of our habitats or environments. So we always, when we think about right plant, right place, we also think about invasive species control, removal, and making sure that whenever we're planting a new landscape that we're not bringing in some type of landscape plant material that is invasive. You can't have those highly invasive plant materials really in your landscape to be considered a Florida-friendly landscape. So yes, that is coral ardisia. Great job. So, but when we think about right plant, right place, that really comes down to when you're designing and planning a landscape, you're selecting plants that fit those environmental conditions. They fit those environmental conditions as well as they fit the functionality of a landscape. How is a landscape supposed to function and work? So one thing that I think about is turf grass. If turf grass is really good ground cover, if it's functional. If you're not using the ground cover and you're wanting to attract more wildlife, you can reduce the amount of turf grass in your landscape and increase your plant beds, because then those plants can start to serve a new function. But really, when we start to going back to environmental conditions, when we start to plan a landscape where we're putting plants that fit and thrive, that match those environmental conditions that we're planting in, those plants do much, much better. They survive and thrive in that landscape. So what it does is it requires less water, less irrigation. It can help reduce the pest pressure, and just as well, it can reduce the amount of work and maintenance that's required to go into a landscape. So before I start giving things away, in the chat box, what are some of those environmental conditions that we think about when we need to match plants to our site? What are some of the things that we need to consider? Drought tolerance, absolutely. The amount of sun, shade, temperature, that's really good. Soil type, water availability, soil pH, yep. Yeah, so a lot of things are coming in, but we've hit some really good ones. The amount of sunlight. What's your sun shade conditions? Some plants prefer full sun, some prefer full shade, and some prefer that in between area as well. So when we plant them in those good sun conditions, they just thrive as overall. Drought tolerance. Some plants have a good drought tolerance, some do not. The amount of moisture availability that is required to them, how much moisture. Some don't like much moisture at all. Some like to be swimming in water almost all year round. So the amount of moisture that's available to them. Temperature, we will refer to that as sometimes as our climate conditions, our hardiness zone. Where we live in Alachua County, we are primarily in USDA hardiness zone 9A. The farthest northern most corner of the county will technically be 8B. So you can go onto USDA website, and we can actually probably pull up a link, and we could send you to that USDA link that shows you how to find your hardiness zone, because some of you might not be from Alachua County that's in this webinar with us. So understanding those climate conditions. Some plants do really well in our tropical climates or warmer weather, some do not. One of my favorite plants I used to live up north, are hostas, and hostas don't grow really well down here. You could probably get them in the northern part of Florida, but they just don't like the heat. But it's the same thing. Think about those tropical plants. I remember when I first moved to Florida about 20 years ago, I imagined I was moving into this tropical paradise. You know what you see on TV, palm trees, big tropical lush landscape all over the place. But when I got here, I moved to Jacksonville. It was just a landscape of pine trees and cabbage palms and saw palmettos, So I was taken completely aback, because that wasn't the landscape that grew well in those environmental conditions. I know better now, but nonetheless, so right plant, right place. So we talked about sun, shade conditions, moisture availability, and climate. One thing I also think is important to talk about is the size. How big does a plant get? Think about the width that it gets as well as the height that it gets. When we're planning a landscape, when we're trying to attract birds and wildlife, it's really nice to view them out a picture window. If you have a nice big picture window at your home, you don't want to put any plants in front of your window that's going to grow up in front and block the window, so you cannot see the wildlife outside, as well as it's a security issue. But if you have the ability to plant plants and you let them grow the size that they want to be as mature plants, that significantly reduces the amount of maintenance required for your landscape. I mean, one of my landscaping pet peeves, which maybe you've probably seen before, is it's the sweet viburnum in front of windows. The sweet viburnum wants to grow to be 20 feet tall and about 15 to 20 feet wide. And we're constantly seeing people have to prune it constantly to keep it underneath the window. And that's a lot of excessive maintenance, where if you just picked a plant that grew well underneath a window and wouldn't grow up above that, then it'd be less maintenance for you. But anyways, that's right plant, right place. And that relates to attracting wildlife, because if we think about landscape function and how landscapes work, you know, we want to make sure that we are planting plants that serve a purpose when we're trying to attract wildlife. And we'll talk more about that. With this next section, we're actually going to jump into attracting wildlife, because when we want to attract wildlife, we have to plant with a purpose beyond just the aesthetics. We have to plant with a purpose to help attract wildlife, help to attract those beneficial insects to our landscape. So the reason we want to attract wildlife, or why we are wanting to focus so much on that today, is because we think about those urbanizing landscapes, urban areas rapidly increasing worldwide. And as they increase, we're losing those prime habitats. And that's really bad for diversity of wildlife, for populations, etc. So I want to show this little image really quick. So on the left, you can see there's like a giant contiguous interior habitat in that green, darker green, and then what we call the edge habitat is in that lighter green color. So what happens is the best part of our wildlife populations and diversity is in what would be considered that interior habitat. Imagine that being a really large forest. But then all of a sudden you start fragmenting it through different types of roadway development, fragmenting it through, well, roadways, commercial development, residential development, etc. It starts to fragment those environments and those ecosystems up into those smaller chunks. So all this development, what it does is it prevents wildlife from going back and forth between those different areas, those different ecosystems. So what ends up happening is you end up having a loss of that interior habitat, that increased edge habitat, which is a high conflict zone, but also you have a decrease in overall habitat quality, a decrease in reproduction success within those, with the wildlife, and a decrease in genetic diversity. So that's one of the issues that I know a lot of wildlife biologists or conservationists have an issue with, is maintaining a a genetically diverse population of specific species, because the minute that the genetic diversity starts to decline, you start having issues with that local population. So that's why it's a huge concern that when we think about habitat fragmentation, is as the environment starts to get fragmented apart in different pieces due to development, or it could be some type of natural disaster like fire, floods, etc., that we need to think about how is this going to have an impact on our ecosystem, right, our environment. So going back to this 2060, think about how we're at now, and looking at that picture of the 2060, we're going to severely fragment the environment more and more as we do more development. So there are different strategies that we can do, looking at from the homeowner's point of view, as well as looking at from city or urban regional planning, as well as state planning through municipal codes, et cetera, policy updates. But so there's a lot of strategies that we can do, but we're going to obviously focus on those residential strategies that we can do to help, you know, when we see this fragmented landscape starting to happen or happening, we can start to do something now within our landscapes. So to kind of walk you through kind of what that fragmentation could look like, is here's our original, let's say this is an unimpacted habitat. But through different types of development, it slowly gets fragmented. It becomes these different fragmented landscapes where it leads to this decline in genetic diversity. It leads to those decrease in habitats, increased edge effects. So this is kind of like where we're at now. But how I start to think about it is I think about, when we are trying to create habitats for wildlife, I always use the road trip analogy, or I like to say it. Imagine you're going on a road trip. If you had the ability to go on a road trip, or say you're going on a road trip and you did not have the ability to get gas, eat food, stay in a hotel or a motel, or be able to drink water, would you go on that road trip? Probably not. It wouldn't be a very successful road trip. But imagine as wildlife being that same exact way. If you have these different habitat populations and you want that genetic diversity to increase, you need a way to help give them an incentive. You need them to be able to get food. You need them to be able to get shelter, to rest, just like you would be going on a road trip. So it's important that we look at these fragmented landscapes and say, okay, they're fragmented. There's a lot of decisions that were made prior to us, but what can we do now to help improve these fragmented landscapes? So that's when I start to think about these backyard habitats and what can we do as an individual homeowner. And all of a sudden you're starting to create these little islands, these little spots, these respite areas where wildlife have the ability to stop. Obviously, that's going to be primarily like your birds, a lot of insects, flying insects, because they have to be able to probably go over roadways. They have to be able to transect different urban areas that are not hospitable to them. But looking at that, say, imagine we have homes that start to pop up within this fragmented landscape that's developed, but these homes start to become these little hot spots for, to attract wildlife. But then say we start to have neighborhoods. Neighborhoods start to introduce different types of policies or practices that help attract wildlife to their neighborhoods, at least provide a habitat or an area that is safe for them to stop as we start making these new changes. But let's go one step further. Imagine you having a community that starts to bring in different types of greenways. Greenways to help as like conservation areas. Those greenways can help literally connect some of those habitat structures through different those greenways, which can serve as linear ecosystems to help with this migration of wildlife around through the area. But then some other strategies that we're seeing now that are really important are property owners, landowners are actually donating land to nonprofit organizations, or putting them in conservation and perpetuity. And that's when we're actually starting to see some other big linkages of habitats back together. So we have the ability to take these fragmented landscapes and reconnect them back. So, but it all starts at different scales. And one of the best ways to start is at the individual homeowner scale. And that's like, what can you do in your landscape? And then how can you share that information with everybody within your community? So in the chat box, if you're looking at the homeowner or as homeowners, a lot of you mentioned it earlier, what do we need to attract? What do we need to attract wildlife? What are those things that we need to bring wildlife to our landscape? Go ahead and put those in the chat box. Wonderful. Seeing food, shelter, water, flowers, water, yeah, food, safe spaces. Wonderful. Habitat, shelter, cover, food. Awesome. Water, a diversity of plants. Yes, plant diversity is important. So diversity of food sources. I cannot live off of Twinkies alone. I need to have a diverse selection of different foods in order to be healthy. So, but when we think about what do we need in our landscape to attract wildlife, I always think about asking this man. This is Bear Grylls. So you probably know him. He's the survival expert. So he and I are really good friends. Not really, but if you ask him, what do you prioritize in any type of survival situation, he will say shelter, fire, water, food. That is incredibly important. I used to teach wilderness survival for Boy Scouts of America years ago. And this is the same prioritization that we teach all the scouts, because it's based off of just how do you survive? What are the basic needs in order to survive? You need shelter. Without shelter, you could get hypothermia. You'd be unprotected from the elements. Without fire, again, you can get a hypothermia. You'd be unprotected from the elements, water, and food. So you need those prioritizations in order to survive. So to get more technical with it, we have what we call the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And what we look at is those physiological needs. Like the very bottom of that pyramid is food, water, warmth, and rest. If you want to go to those higher levels within that hierarchy of needs, you need to achieve those at the bottom first and work your way up. So if you ever get to that point at the very tippy top of self-actualization or achieving one's full potential, you need to achieve esteem needs, belongingness and love needs, safety needs, and physiological needs. So this is what we do in human behavior and psychology, but this same basic understanding relates directly to attracting wildlife to our landscape. We need to make sure that we're addressing those basic physiological needs in order to allow them to feel comfortable and safe within the space. But also, we start thinking about reproduction. We need to create that for them so they can reproduce. So let's go ahead and let's think about some of the things that we can attract. What do I want to attract? So it's important to know that there is not one simple solution that say, if I plant this, 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 and this, that you're going to attract all of the fauna of the state of Florida to your backyard. But what you can do is start to say, this is what I want to plant for. And you're going to end up by addressing that animal's needs, which we had earlier pop up in the chat, a lot of huge diversity. Some of the most common ones that we do see that homeowners are trying to attract like butterflies, bees, or just our pollinators, our birds. If you want to attract an alligator as well, that's good. I just really liked that picture of the bird, so I included that one. Or gopher tortoises. Gopher tortoise, that's one of our endemic species. It only exists in the state of Florida. So what do I want to attract? That's going to be the biggest thing. Every single species has completely different needs. So understanding what those species needs are, you have the ability to have a higher success rate of attracting them to your landscape. It also takes a lot of patience and time. It's not necessarily you build it and they will come mentality. There's a lot of patience that's associated with it. So the tips for attracting wildlife at home, we mentioned a lot of these already, but we're going to talk briefly about all of these tips. So provide food. They need food. Supply water. Leave snags. Manage pets. That's very, very important. Reduce insecticide use. Reduce mowed lawn areas, and increase vertical layering. So we'll cover all of these going forward, but does everyone know what this bird is on the right? It's one of our endangered bird species in the state. And I have heard of some homeowners, not in Alachua County, but I've heard of some homeowners finding this within their landscapes. So that is a red-cockaded woodpecker. That is one of our state's endangered bird species. So along with like a scrub jay, that's one of our other endangered bird species. I actually know someone that can call scrub jays, which is quite fascinating. But anyway, so let's go ahead and let's move forward and we'll talk about each one of these different tips. So provide food. There's different forms of food that you can provide different types of wildlife. So birds, I like to talk about birds because if you can attract birds to your landscape, you're going to probably bring in substantially more species than if you plant specifically for like a butterfly. But they all have obviously the same benefit, or they all have benefits to them. But when we talk about birds, you know, it's important to think about what do the birds like to eat. So on the left we have soot or sweet, depending on who's pronouncing it. And on the right, we have a Baltimore Oriole on some oranges. So there's different types of bird food that you can provide to birds. And we have a link that we can send you all at the bottom. It's on this PowerPoint as well. But it's an IFAS publication on selecting bird feeders based off the types of birds that you want to attract to your landscape. Because some birds are going to be attracted, like that Oriole is, to fruit in the landscape versus like a general bird seed or sweet. But, you know, not just with what bird food can you provide, what are some of the plants that you can provide that provide fruit? You know, it's also important to think seasonally. You know, think year round. You don't want everything fruiting or providing that food at one time of the year when you have a full year that you can provide that food. But these are some plants that I really like that are very bird-friendly plants, the red mulberry, as well as the beautyberry. Both are incredibly attractive to birds, both native species. One of my favorites, I love beautyberry. That's one of my favorite ornamental trees. So think seasonally whenever you're thinking about any type of food that you can bring into the landscape. You know, and that's for birds, but also think about the other types of pollinators. So we have, you know, birds, butterflies, bees, but they are preferring those nectar plants. The nectar plants, you know, I have a salvia outside my door, and we had a hummingbird come in there recently, which I was really excited to see. But we're seeing a lot of butterflies come to, like in this picture on here, you see butterflies on the pentas. I have some passion flowers where I have some butterflies on the passion flowers. So those nectar sources, and with butterflies, some butterflies prefer specific nectar sources. Butterflies have what we call host plants. And those host plants are the specific plants that they need in order to like lay their eggs and develop into the caterpillar and pupate and form the next generation of the butterfly. But they also have the nectar plant requirements, or just food sources for them that they prefer. So how can we attract more wildlife? By thinking of that nectar food source that we can provide. And again, it can change what type of plant preference based off of the type of wildlife that you're trying to attract for. The second one is provide water. All the animals that come into your landscape are going to need water. They need water in some capacity, just like we do. With birds, it's really, really easy. Bird baths are a great way to provide that water. One thing that's hard to do sometimes, or you don't see as often, is how to provide water in a landscape to butterflies. What I usually do is I have a very shallow dish, and I just put a little bit of water in there, and they can get up around the edge on that dish, and they can drink water out of that shallow dish. Or like in this image that you see right here, it's just like a little puddle that's on a rock, and the butterfly is drinking from that little puddle on the rock. So if you have water features in your landscape, if you have the ability to have a little shallow space in that water feature where water can like lap up on an edge or create like a little wet area where butterflies can come to, that's a great way to provide water to them. We're commonly not seeing that as much as we'd like or as much as I'd like in butterfly gardens, is making sure that we're providing water for them. The third tip, tree snags. This is one of my favorite, is tree snags can provide, essentially, they can provide cover and nesting for over 40 species of birds and animals in the state of Florida. Not, you know, that's not necessary, and that's just what we say is the vertical tree snags. The ones where like fallen trees or felled trees or brush piles, they provide substantially more benefits to habitat for multiple species of birds, mammals, animals, etc. But tree snags essentially are just dead wood. They're dead trees that are that birds are able to come to, and you can see on the picture on the right, There's a lot of holes in it where they can, they'll bore out holes, they can nest in them, like, you know, owls will do it, some woodpeckers do it. But as well as those little holes will eventually provide habitat maybe for some a honeybee colony or some type of bee colony. As well as this high open spots, this high roost on that tree snag provides a great hunting location for a lot of our predatory birds. So like red-tailed hawks, red-shouldered hawks, etc., they like to sit on top of those tree snags and just watch and survey an area so they can go hunting. So tree snags actually provide a major benefit to your landscape. But you always need to be careful with tree snags. It's a dead tree, so it can fall. So if you have a large enough property and you have a tree snag, or what could become a tree snag, I always like to think to myself, if this tree were to fall over, could that tree potentially hurt somebody or my home or something of value on my property? Or if it just falls on my property and nothing will happen, you know, there's obviously a clear difference. So if it can fall and nothing will happen, then it's a great thing to leave in your landscape. But if it can fall and cause damage to a building, structure, or somebody, then I would consider taking that out. But the tree snags are really, really important. One of our historic neighborhoods here in Gainesville is called Duck Pond, and it has a tree snag. They have a tree snag, or one homeowner has a tree snag in the middle of one of our historic neighborhoods. And I love pointing it out because I think it has really cool structure and form. So it actually has a really cool aesthetic quality to the landscape, but also the benefit that it's adding to the environment, the habitat in the urban part of Gainesville. Another great way to see a lot of tree snags that are active is in nature. Just go out. I've seen a lot of them along the Santa Fe River. So if you're ever paddling or canoeing down the Santa Fe River, just look up along the shore at all, you know, when you're in the cypress domes or going along the cypress domes or like the mesic hammocks, look at all the trees right along the river. You will see holes in a lot of those trees because birds will nest in there and they will hunt from there looking out over the river. So it's really, really neat to see, and because it adds a substantial benefit to the landscape. And that's just those tree snags. If you do have some area in your landscape, the capability to do it, just doing brush piles, you know, that adds important wildlife and cover, or sorry, it provides an important structure for wildlife, providing cover and protection. A lot of birds can nest in there, a lot of small mammals can nest in there, and it just helps keep them safe and protected. So if you have an area in your landscape where you can provide that, it's amazing. It helps attract them. They feel safe, they feel secure. It helps provide that shelter that they need. This one, managed pets. So that cat right there, she's our friendly neighborhood cat. She's adopted my son, but she has a docked ear. She is owned by somebody, but that cat is an outdoor cat. So it's important that even though they're fuzzy and friendly, well, sometimes friendly and sweet as cats can be, that it's important I'm back, I'm sorry. Okay, so my internet just went down. Let me get everything going up again. I apologize. Okay, I think I'm up and running. Is everyone there? I apologize for that. Technical issues on my part. Okay, so let me go back to, I think I left off talking about the cats. So when we have to manage cats within our landscape or manage pets in our landscape, cats are the most notorious. Some of them being kind of like our household cats, but a large portion of them are actually a lot of the wild cats that just stray cats, etc. But a study that was done in 2013 found that cats, the estimate is cats per year are killing 1.3 to 4 billion birds and somewhere between 6.3 and 22.3 billion mammals each year. That's a lot. That is a lot. So that's why it's important to manage our pets in our landscape. So if we have outdoor cats, you know, or if we have a colony of cats, I don't know if there's a technical term for that, how are they being managed? Can they be managed? Is there something that if they're wild, do you need, or feral, do you need to report them to animal control services? But anyways, so how do we manage our pets in the landscape? So this cat specifically here, I saw her one day chomping down on a vole, and I was so upset. I was like, how did you get that vole? But again, it's just this was a feral cat that someone adopted, but lives as an outdoor cat within our neighborhood. So they have a huge impact, and they can scare away wildlife from our environment or from our landscapes. So moving forward to reducing insecticide use. This is really important because if we just spray and manage pests in our landscape by just spraying insecticides, you know, those insecticides, a lot of them do not discriminate what they're impacting or what they're hurting. So you could spray something for a specific worm or a specific bug, but you're killing all the other bugs. You know, what I want to do is in the chat box, when we think about landscape pests, what percent of landscape pests, or sorry, what percent of the species of insects do you think we consider a pest? What's that percentage? Got some good answers coming in. So I've seen like 70, 10, 50, 90%, very small percentage. One person has given me the correct answer-ish, close enough, but it's actually, of all the insects in our landscape, maybe 1% we actually consider a pest. Maybe 1%. So if you think about all the stuff we apply to our landscapes, if we just do general insecticide applications, that general insecticide is for one small percentage of our insect population, but actually it can have much larger impacts on wildlife and those beneficial insects. Because if we attract wildlife to our landscape, they're going to naturally manage and reduce that pest pressure within that landscape because they're going to predate on them. They're going to eat those bugs. And it's going to significantly reduce that pest population that way. But as well, if you're managing your landscape appropriately, so there's cultural controls, there's more prevention. So it comes back to right plant, right place. If you have a plant that's in a landscape that's happy and healthy because you're putting the right plant in the right place, it's going to naturally have a higher defenses against pest pressure. insect pressure. So if we just follow cultural controls, we can significantly reduce our spraying for insects or any type of pest pressure. That's a better way to say it. But if cultural controls aren't necessarily controlling pest pressure, then we look for physical and mechanical controls. And that's where you literally, usually, you know, the small populations before they get out of hand. I always say a shoe is one of the best tools that you can use because you can just squash the bad bugs in your landscape, or you can manually remove them, drop those pests, the bad pests, into a bucket of soapy water. But that's the physical and mechanical removal. As well as like mechanical removal, you know, going back to coral ardesia, we try to pull as much and remove a lot of those berries as much as possible to control that invasive population so we don't have to spray as much. Then we have biological control. So biological control, if cultural and the physical and the mechanical controls aren't working, we can go to those biological controls. So biological controls, that can be is like, what can Mother Nature try to provide us to help combat some of these invasive species or these pests within our landscape? So a great example is air potato. The air potato beetle is a biological control that we use to manage or significantly reduce the air potato population, which is a highly invasive species that we have around the state. And then if you go through all these different steps or all these different methods from cultural, physical, mechanical, biological, and you still can't get that pest pressure under control, that's when you go into chemical treatments. But usually if you're following these IPM strategies, it's very rare that you actually get to that point. So if we have the ability to reduce insecticide use, the birds will be able to feed on them and they'll be healthy because we don't want to make insects toxic to some of the birds, but having that healthy pest population or insect population, birds can come in and help control that population, especially some of those that we consider pests. So we always talk about the integrated pest management. And even though we're not talking about it, this is managing yard pests responsibly is one of the principles of the flora-friendly landscaping program. So the next one is reduced mowed lawn areas. This comes back to the statements that we were talking about earlier, is right plant, right place. You know, what are those environmental conditions? How can you bring those appropriate plants in? But also it follows functionality. What is the function of a landscape? Do you have 5 acres? 5 acres is a lot. If you live on like a typical neighborhood, and say you're somewhere between a 1/4 of an acre or a 1/2 acre lot, and the whole thing is turf grass, is that whole thing serve a function? Can you reduce that turf area to help provide additional function, such as attracting more wildlife to your landscape by providing food, shelter, and water sources to bring them into that landscape or allow them to stop there as they move to other areas? So reducing those mowed lawn areas can be a great way to increase your landscape beds and provide those necessities for the wildlife to come into your landscape. Of course, if you live in an HOA, you might be subjected to certain amounts of turf grass versus ornamental beds. That's a different discussion for another day. And the last one that I have is increasing layering. Increased layering is very important because, you know, we sometimes, when I do like a landscape design, I'm looking down and I'm creating a plan. I'm drawing on a piece of paper. It's 2-dimensional, but I need to design as well in 3 dimensions when I'm thinking of wildlife and how to attract wildlife, because wildlife live at different heights. They live in different areas within our environment, within those ecosystems. So we kind of have, in this image, this is a good diagram that I really like. It's specifically targeted towards birds, but it has that ground layer. So you have a ground layer. So those are those insects, birds, mammals that are staying below the ground, your shrub layer, your understory canopy, as well as your overstory canopy. And you can see that with those, at least just looking at the birds, that they prefer those different layers. So if we can provide layers, that increasing height canopy areas within our landscape, we have the ability to attract more to our landscape. So increased layering is very, very important. And of course, you're also sometimes, one of your limitations is the amount of space that you do have in your landscape. So there's ways that you can get creative, but making sure that at least you have some layers or variations in height to attract a more diverse population is going to be very beneficial to your landscape and the population, wildlife population. So we just covered those 7 tips, and we're now back to the central question. So once completing this, hopefully you all have the ability to help to now answer the question, what is the flora-friendly landscaping program, and what are the essential elements to attracting wildlife to my landscape? So, so the flora-friendly landscaping program is very important because we're thinking about how are we managing our landscapes across the entire state to help conserve water, attract wildlife, et cetera, protect water quality. But then how do we specifically, or what are those essential elements that help attract wildlife to our landscapes? So we're going to open up some questions in the chat box here in a minute, but I want to go ahead and share some of this information with you. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Here's my contact information, the tclam@alachuacounty.us. You can also send email questions to our Master Gardener Help Desk, which is the mag@alachuacounty.us. Follow us on our Facebook page. We now have an office YouTube page where we're putting up videos, educational videos, and we have a new podcast within our extension office for the county that we've started. So you can follow our podcast on any of your favorite platforms. We have it out on those. I do have one question that popped up. How do we sign up for the FFL program? That's a really good question. So you don't necessarily sign up for the FFL program. It's just ways to adopt or things to do in your landscapes. It's just something that you end up doing on your own. But we do have a certain amount of criteria that if you meet certain benchmarks of the FFL program, you have the ability to get your landscape recognized as a flora-friendly landscape. And you actually get like a little sign that you can put out on your landscape and a little certificate that you can hang up on your wall to talk about. We have 2 different layers. We have a silver recognition and a gold recognition. And the state is looking at doing a platinum level recognition for your landscape. What you see right here, these are some resources. These resources are just some of the publications that I use specifically to help put this question together, or this presentation together. I see I have one of the URLs wrong on here. I'll send that out, but that's just the Florida-Friendly Landscaping Program publications. We have a resource guide for all of those documents online. But what I will end up doing is I will send this PowerPoint out to everybody that registered to this program tomorrow. It'll just be a PDF for everybody to have access to. Oh, thank you, Mark, for putting that link in the chat box for the Florida-Friendly Landscaping Program. But feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to reach out to the Master Gardener Help Desk, because if you want to make that transition as you move or try to adopt these different principles to attract more wildlife to your landscape, feel free to reach out to us. You know, if you want to adopt attract a specific butterfly, we have those resources. Specific bird, we have those resources. We'll help you out. And we will help lead you to the right direction to make sure that you have the best landscape for Florida and its wildlife. So thank you all, and feel free to answer questions. We still got some time together. Again, thanks everybody for participating and showing up. Oh, my pleasure. Thank you all. And there's a lot of familiar names that I've seen in here today, so thank you all for coming and joining us. If you're still in here, what is some of the information that you found to be most important to you today? Layering, nice. And I'll open up the mics for Mark and, oh, where's my panelist button? And Susan, if y'all have any comments, or what are some of the things that you all like to plant in do you have in your landscape to attract wildlife?
I have a pile of leaves. That's where my leaves start, and all the wood gets added to as it falls out of trees. And I hate to say to the one person who asked about rabbits, my rabbits love that pile. But bird feeders for sure, bring in the birds. And I liked your comment about the different foods for different birds and really thinking about which birds you want. That Baltimore Oriole loves grapes in my yard. Yeah. And then it's just fun to see all the ones that just are going through. Like right now, the warblers are going through, and they're fun to watch. I had a grosbeak the other day for the first time ever at my
wonderful.
Yeah, so I mean, there are all sorts of things that I try, and lots of different flowers. I was saying on here, at one point, scientists studied my yard for 3 solid years to see what was going on with pollinators. And one thing they kept mentioning to me was try to have blossoms all the time. So throughout the year, there are blossoms going in my garden, and you know, not always a lot, but there's always something. That plumbago has really hung in there this year. So those are just some of my ideas.
One of my favorite stories about attracting wildlife that I really like was when I used to work at Kentucky State Botanical Gardens in Lexington. I was one of the year-round employees, and it was it'd be in the middle of the winter. I vividly remember this. In the middle of the winter, there was about 8 to 12 inches of snow on the ground and ice everywhere. And I went into the middle of the garden where it was like a little private space, but it was all enclosed with holly. So just American holly, and they're all fruiting. So covered in red berries. And, you know, you're in Kentucky in the middle of the winter. Most of the trees are deciduous, very few are evergreen, very few are providing any type of food or habitat. So I walk in there, and I swear there are robins. There was probably 70 robins within this little area. They're the size of softballs because all they've been doing is eating holly berries for like 2-3 days. They're just gorged on holly berries. So I sat on a bench within there for just a few minutes, and like I had a robin sitting right next to me, just looking at me like, I hope you're cool because I'm too full to fly right now. But it was like, you know, when you think about that year-round food availability, there were so many birds there because that was the only food source that was readily available to that population. So it was neat. Yeah, so Maria said, surprised 2 weeks ago, a huge swirl of birds landed several times on the Weeping Yale Pond, just full of red berries. So I didn't mention it, but that is a benefit of, you know, having some of our native species. So some of our non-native species can provide great structure and habitat for wildlife. But some of our native plant species have the ability to attract a higher diversity of species to them. So in a weeping yopon, that's just the yopon holly, the Ilex vomitoria is a great example of one of our native trees that we find within the landscape. Of course, the weeping isn't necessarily, is that considered the native one, Mark? Is it?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's just a cultivar of the native one.
Yeah. All right, are there any more questions that we can help address? We have, let's see. That's a good question. So we have one within our Q&A. It says, if I'd like to have multiple types of bird feeders, do they need to be a specific distance apart to avoid interterritorial issues? Yes. It's not that big of a deal really, but you're going to have some birds that are a little bit more territorial. Mockingbirds, for instance, they'll chase off other birds, especially if it's nesting season. So if you don't have the ability to space them apart, that's fine. It's not going to be detrimental, but if you can add a little bit of space to them, that can help out. Most of our bird species are okay sharing. How far is space? That's hard to answer. That's very hard to answer for the bird feeders because it can be determined not necessarily by the species, but the bird themselves. Mine are spaced about 6 feet apart. I have one that's real far away, but I haven't had any issues with those. Now, periodically, I've seen, recently I saw a cardinal chase off some birds, but that wasn't persistent. That was only just happening for a short period of time. So, and I think it's mating season for them. So the males are a little bit more ornery than normal. How to keep squirrels out? Woo, that's a very good question. That's hard to do. My dog is really good at keeping our squirrels out of our yard, as well as my son. They don't care about anything else except for the squirrels. But we do actually have a document that has some information. I'm going to put that in the chat box, where it actually has some information about different landscape pests and how to keep them out, but specifically for squirrels, there are some taste repellents to prevent chewing or debarking of trees. So like my mother the other day lost a lot of her blossoms or flowers from her magnolia tree because the squirrels were just chewing them off. So she put some chew repellent on some of the flowers that she could reach to help out. As well as this document says for birds, bury a sheet of hardware cloth horizontally, several inches below the surface of the soil to protect bulbs. Oh, that's a good idea. And there are some bird feeders that you can get that if a certain weight is pushed onto them, they close off. So usually for like our smaller birds, they have the ability to land on those bird feeders and still get access to the food, but the minute a squirrel jumps on it, it closes it up. Mark, do you have anything in your landscape that's for attracting wildlife?
I have an enormous brush pile in the back corner that is so attractive to everything, and it's got kind of a log base and then a bunch of debris on top, and it seems like animals love that brush pile. And then just the diversity of plants, you know, things with big leaves and small leaves and different colored and formed of flowers and fruit, and then water. I've got multiple bird baths. And so I find that combination of this brush pile for shelter, the water, and then the various nectar or fruit sources is what really works for me.
Wonderful. Yeah, I know there's always a concern about mosquitoes within bird feeders, but just periodically just spraying it out with a hose and just replacing the water is an easy way to manage them and control them. Squirrels are baffled by baffles. Yep. Have you ever seen people set up obstacle courses for squirrels?
Oh yeah, and there's great videos online of people with very complicated and amusing
Yeah.
obstacle courses for squirrels. Keeps them entertained.
I'm surprised, since we haven't all been self-isolating, social distancing, that we haven't seen more of those obstacle courses pop up. All righty, well, we have a few more, so we'll answer this question, but we'll probably go ahead and close out from everything. But I do want to thank everybody for attending, especially those that are still in here. Thank you for sticking around. This webinar is recorded, and we're going to post it onto our Facebook page, but as well as I'll send a link out to everybody tomorrow when I send the PDF, so you have a copy of the webinar so you can revisit it later. So thank you all very, very much. And I also like to thank Mark and Susan, our Master Gardener volunteers, for helping us out today and helping answer some of the questions. So thank you all, and I appreciate your time and spending your time with us. So may the 4th be with you, and have a great evening.
Thanks, Taylor.
Yes,
All right.
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.